Hi, I'm Rob with Yo Photo Dude. Let's learn to take better photos. In this video, we're going to focus on composition. Today's cameras are great technological marvels, and they can do a lot of the technical things for us. They can focus the photos, make sure the exposure is right, make sure the colors are right. But the one thing that a camera cannot do is it can't decide what to take a photo of. That is purely your responsibility. So we'll cover a few techniques that might be helpful to help you think about how to make your photos look better. But let's start with this basic concept. People pick up a camera, they push the button, and they just take what they get. And that's called a snapshot. And a lot of times snapshots aren't very good. So let's look at an example. So let's say you're out in the park with me and you decide to take a photo with the landscape behind me, and this is what you see in your viewfinder. Notice I'm very small. There's a lot of background over here, a lot of background over here. There's wasted space up here that's not really contributing to the photo. So this is a good lead-in to the first rule I want to talk about. Rule 1, shoot tight, crop tighter. Now, I've moved a lot closer to the camera so that you're now taking a photo of your subject, the person. You're not taking so much a subject of the landscape anymore. Now, with that said, if your mission is to take a landscape and you want to put a person in it, they can be very small because the subject is the landscape. But in this case, the subject is the person or the pet or the wildlife that you're taking your photo of. And so you want them to fill the frame as much as possible, and there will be enough left over for you to get a sense of where the photo was taken. So this is the basic concept, shoot tight, crop tighter. When you get the photo in post-production inside of Photoshop or whatever tool you use, you can even crop it even more to get you a more refined look. So this leads to rule number 2, the rule of thirds. Now, depending on your camera, you may have some grid lines in the viewfinder that divide your screen into a tic-tac-toe grid. If not, you'll just kind of have to visualize that tic-tac-toe grid. There are 4 lines, 2 vertical, 2 horizontal, and they have 4 points where those 4 lines intersect each other. The rule of thirds simply states if you put your subject on one of those intersecting points or on one of the lines, you'll have a more entertaining photo. It'll be more pleasing and easier to figure out. So currently, the way this shot's composed, my eyes are on the top rule of third line. Okay, that's a good place to have it. I'm filling the frame kind of nicely. I've got a place to go. We'll talk about that more in just a second. And the composition's more pleasing. If I back up more, okay, I'm still on that vertical rule of thirds line. My eyes are still on the intersecting point, and I have the place to move to. Now, you can use this to disadvantage. If your subject is facing this way, or you're photographing some wildlife, they're leaving the frame. And this creates an uneasiness and awkwardness, because now I have space behind me that's like, why? I'm losing that person. Simply turn or compose your subject so that they're leading into the scene. Now, these 3 vertical parts of the scene, your subject and where they're going to, fill the frame in a very nice, pleasing way. So that's one use of the rule of thirds. Let's take a minute and look at the horizontal lines with regards to landscape. We've kind of recomposed a little bit, and now we're using our 2 horizontal lines to vertically divide the land into 3 parts. There's the foreground, the middle ground, and the background. In a lot of landscapes, the background is going to be sky, the middle might be your lake and mountains, and the foreground might be whatever textures are in front of you. In this case, I've got some wilderness ground in front of me. The lake and the far shoreline are making up the middle third of the frame, and the tree line and above is filling up the third frame. Now I'm using all of that space in a useful way. No one thing is dominating the scene. So here's an example where I have taken a photo and I've put the rule of thirds line on it for you. You can see that there are 4 lines. Each of them intersect at 4 points. For this particular photo, I've chosen to put the top third as the tree-lined shore of the lake, and the lake fills up the bottom 2 portions of the grid. I've also chosen to put the rower and his boat on the bottom third line. And I've also put the rower specifically on the rightmost vertical line so that the intersecting point is at pretty much the point of peak interest. And at this point, the frame is divided up very well. There's a lot of interest. The rower has some place to go into the scene, and you get a sense of action that something's about to happen. So that's the basics of rule of thirds. Use the vertical lines and the cross points to put your main subject. Use the vertical lines to create motion into the picture. Use the horizontal lines to divide the space up in a more pleasing way. So let's discuss the third rule. Watch your backgrounds. This is probably the easiest rule that almost every photographer ends up forgetting when they're taking photos. And it's really easy to understand why. You're focused on your subject. How are they posed? They have a good smile on their face. And you're not really noticing the background. So watch for things coming out of people's heads. I'm pretty sure there's a tree coming out of my head right now. And that's just a line that's just going to take your eye away from the subject and lead them away, not to the photo. Simply recompose and make sure you don't have those distracting elements behind them. Now, those distracting elements might not always be trees and branches. It could be power lines or building lines or anything that's coming through their head that you don't want it there. That leads us into the fourth rule. Look for leading lines. Sometimes you want the lines to bring the focus to the subject. Maybe you have a picture of a lighthouse sitting up on top of an area and there's a stone spiral staircase leading up to the lighthouse. That's a good use of the leading lines. The lines are taking you to the subject. And they usually might start out wide and narrow as they get there. There's a special type of leading line called a vanishing point, where you start out with like a wide path that narrows off into the distance to almost nothing. Those lines are great for leading to a subject. And finally, the fifth rule, framing. Look for natural frames in the environment around you. Those could be, in this simple case here, I've used the trees to provide a box around me, and that helps bring focus into me as a subject. It could be the canopy of leaves arching over top of my head that helps put another frame around me. Natural frames occur all over the place. It could be a hole in a chain link fence, and you're using that chain link fence to focus in on a particular subject. You don't always find frames and leading lines in your photos, but you should be aware of them as you're scoping out where you're shooting, or if you're walking around. If you find a frame or some leading lines, see if you can use it in your photography, and it will raise your game a step. We'll cover all of these topics in deeper context in later videos. But for today, to get started, these steps will help you take better photos. This is Rob for Yo Photo Dude. See you next time.